The generations of Noah spread across the plains of Shinar like rivers flowing from a single source. After the flood, the earth was clean and new, the air sweet, and the hearts of men full of purpose. They spoke one tongue, and their words bound them together like woven threads. Families grew into tribes, tribes into nations, yet they all shared the same speech and the same dream, to build a life free from fear. The memory of the flood lingered, yet it became a story rather than a warning. The rainbow that once filled the sky now faded into myth, and mankind began to look not upward in gratitude, but outward in ambition. They journeyed eastward, seeking fertile ground, until they came upon a wide plain in the land of Shinar. The soil was rich, the rivers broad, and the land promised prosperity. There they said one to another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and bitumen for mortar. It was the first great city after the flood, and they called it Babel, the gate of God. Among the builders was Nimrod, a mighty man before the Lord, known for his strength and cunning. His voice carried authority, his words stirred the hearts of men. "Let us build a tower," he proclaimed, "whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered upon the face of the earth." The crowd murmured with excitement, their faces bright with pride and wonder. No longer would they wander like their forefathers, subject to the will of nature or the fear of divine judgment. They would rise above it all, carve their own destiny, and stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods. The idea ignited within them a hunger that no flood could wash away, the hunger to be remembered. The work began at dawn each day, when the first rays of the sun touched the plain. Thousands labored, men, women, and children, shaping clay, burning bricks, and hauling them upward in endless rhythm. The sound of hammers echoed like thunder, the ground trembled beneath their ambition. Brick by brick, the tower rose, its base vast as a mountain and its shadow stretching for miles. Birds circled above it in confusion, for the tower pierced the very clouds. Each level reached higher than the last, and the people rejoiced at their progress. "Look," they said, "we ascend to heaven. Nothing can be withheld from us." The builders carved symbols upon the walls, records of their victories, the names of their kings, and the glory of their unity. No one spoke of the Lord anymore, their voices praised only their own hands. Nimrod ruled as king over Babel, and his pride grew with the tower. He wore robes dyed in crimson and gold, and his crown glittered in the sun. His throne stood at the base of the structure, where he watched the laborers climb the spiraling paths to the heavens. He spoke of progress, of greatness, of human power. "The flood came once," he said to his council, "but it shall not come again. For we will dwell above the clouds. Even the wrath of the gods cannot reach us there." His words pleased the people, and their hearts hardened. They began to offer incense to the tower itself, calling it Edom and Enki, the foundation of heaven and earth. Yet among them were a few who still remembered the covenant of Noah. Old men who had heard their grandfathers speak of judgment, of mercy, of the rainbow that sealed God's promise. They whispered in fear, "Is this not rebellion? Does man rise again to defy the Most High?" But their voices were drowned by the sound of construction, swallowed by the pride of the multitude. They prayed quietly, but no one listened. In the heavens, the Lord looked upon the city and the tower which the children of men built. The angels beside him watched in silence, their faces grave. "Behold," said the Lord, "they are one people, and they all have one language. And this they begin to do, now nothing they imagine will be restrained from them. Come, let us go down and confound their speech, that they may not understand one another. The heavens grew still, as though creation itself awaited his command. That night, while the builders slept, a strange wind moved across the plain. It whispered through the unfinished tower, humming through its hollow chambers like the voice of judgment. When morning came, the people rose as usual and began their work. But when one man asked for brick, his neighbor brought him straw. When another shouted for mortar, he was answered with words he could not understand. Confusion spread like fire through dry grass. Men gestured wildly, shouting, pointing, their faces twisted in frustration. Soon anger flared, then fear. "What madness is this?" cried Nimrod, but even his closest guards could not comprehend his command. The once united people broke apart, each family clinging to those whose words they understood. Accusations flew, tools were dropped, and the great tower that had climbed toward heaven stood silent, half-finished and forsaken. The sound of unity was replaced by the noise of division, shouts, quarrels, and the wails of those who realized they could no longer speak to their own kin. The work ceased, and Babel became a place of chaos. Nimrod raged, tearing his garments, yet his power meant nothing now. His kingdom crumbled, scattered by the very tongues that once sang his praise. The people left the plain in groups, each going in a different direction, north, south, east, and west, carrying their new languages and their broken dreams. The Lord watched as they dispersed across the earth, and though his judgment was stern, his mercy was hidden within it. For by scattering them, he saved them from a pride that would have destroyed them all. The tower remained, a monument to human arrogance and divine sovereignty. Storms swept through its halls, and sand covered its base. Birds nested in its cracks, and time wore it down. Yet for generations, people would tell the story of how men once spoke as one, of how they reached for heaven, and of how God himself came down to humble them. And thus the name of the city was called Babel, because there the Lord confounded the language of all the earth. And from that day forward, mankind would speak in many tongues, live in many lands, and build many kingdoms, but never again would they stand as one against the will of the Creator. The world had learned, for a moment, the price of pride, and the Tower of Babel became a symbol forever, not of human strength, but of divine wisdom that humbles the mighty and lifts the lowly. Night fell over the plains of Shinar, and the half-built tower stood like a dark wound against the stars. Fires still burned at its base where the workers once labored, but now the flames flickered without purpose. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the cries of confusion that drifted through the city like echoes of a broken dream. Nimrod stood upon a high platform, his face lit by the firelight, his eyes burning with fury and disbelief. "What has happened to my people?" he cried, but his voice fell into the wind unanswered. His captains stood around him, arguing in strange tongues none could understand. He shouted commands, but they stared blankly, each man speaking a different sound, his words like stones that fell to dust. Nimrod's fists clenched. The great unity he had forged with pride had shattered overnight. He looked upon the tower, once a symbol of man's greatness, and now a monument to chaos. The bricks still stood, the scaffolds reached upward, but the soul of Babel was gone. In his heart, anger warred with fear. He remembered the stories of the flood, how his ancestors had spoken of a God who could destroy the world with a word. But Nimrod had always believed strength could defy heaven. "No," he growled into the darkness, "this is not the will of any god. This is treachery among men." He descended the steps, his guards following like shadows, though none could understand his words. He walked through the camp, past fires where frightened families huddled together, each speaking a language foreign to their neighbors. Mothers wept, children called out, and men argued until their voices broke. Babel had become a storm of tongues. Nimrod lifted his sword to the sky, his voice echoing through the night. "I will not bow. I will rebuild. If heaven strikes us, then we shall strike the heavens." That night, sleep fled from him. In his tent, he lay staring at the ceiling, his mind ablaze with confusion and rage. The sound of strange voices drifted through the canvas walls, once a song of unity, now a cacophony of division. As the hours passed, he closed his eyes and murmured, "If there is a God behind this, show yourself." The wind rose suddenly, and the lamps flickered out. A deep shadow fell across the room. Nimrod felt the air grow cold. Then, in the silence, a voice came, low, resonant, unearthly. "You called upon heaven, King of men," it said, "and heaven has answered." Nimrod rose, his breath sharp, his heart trembling though he masked it with defiance. "Who speaks to me?" he demanded. The darkness thickened, and the voice replied, "I am the one your fathers knew, the Lord of creation, whom you have forgotten." The tent shook, and Nimrod fell to his knees though pride fought within him like fire. "You," he whispered, "you are the one who drowned the world." The voice answered, "I am he who spared it." But men forget mercy when their hearts are filled with pride. You sought to build your name upon the sky, to rise above the Creator, to make men worship themselves. But the breath that forms your words is mine, and the dust that shapes your hands is mine also. You are nothing without me. Nimrod's anger flared, though fear bound his tongue. "If you are God," he said bitterly, "why give man the strength to dream if you mean to crush it?" There was silence for a moment, and then the voice replied, "I gave man the power to dream so that he would seek me, not replace me." Lightning split the sky, and Nimrod fell flat upon the ground, covering his face. The light burned through the tent, illuminating the shadow of his trembling form. "Rise," said the voice, "and look upon what you have built." In an instant, Nimrod found himself standing upon the upper heights of the tower. The night was vast, the stars close enough to touch. Below him stretched the shattered city, thousands of fires burning like dying stars, voices clashing in every direction. He saw men fighting, crying, leaving their homes to wander toward distant lands. His dream had turned to ruin. The voice spoke again, "This is the fruit of your pride. You sought unity without truth, greatness without obedience. You have built Babel upon sand, and it shall fall." Nimrod clenched his hands against the stone railing. "Then what is man to do?" he cried into the wind. "Shall we crawl forever in the dust, afraid of the heavens? Shall no one rise again?" The voice replied, calm and infinite, "One will rise, but not to defy me. In time, a Son of Man will come, who will walk the earth in humility and bring peace through faith, not pride. He will build a kingdom not of bricks, but of hearts. Through him, all tongues shall be one again, not by might, but by love." Nimrod bowed his head, tears mixing with the dust upon his face. "Then I have failed," he whispered. "Yes," said the voice gently, "but your failure shall become the lesson of nations." The vision faded. Nimrod awoke at dawn, the sunlight bleeding through his tent. The tower stood before him, silent, cold, unfinished. Around it, the people of Babel continued to scatter, their shouts now distant. He rose slowly, his strength broken, and walked to the base of the tower. Laying his hand upon the stone, he said softly, "I thought to build a name for myself, but it is you who endure." He turned away and walked into the desert, never to return. In the years that followed, the ruins of Babel became a warning to all who passed, a place of broken speech and silent pride. The tower's shadow stretched long across the plains, and travelers spoke of it with awe and fear. "Here," they said, "man tried to climb to heaven, and heaven came down instead." And so, the story of Nimrod and his vision was passed down through generations, the tale of a king who reached too high and learned that no power, no ambition, and no kingdom can stand apart from the will of God. When the Tower of Babel fell silent, the once united voice of mankind broke into 1,000 echoes. Across the plains of Shinar, families gathered in confusion, each clutching their children, their tools, their meager belongings. They no longer understood the words of their neighbors, yet they shared the same fear in their eyes, the terror of being lost in a world suddenly divided. Smoke rose from the ruins of the city that had promised immortality, and the air still carried the dust of shattered pride. The great tower loomed like a ghost in the morning mist, half-built and hollow, the monument of a dream undone by its own arrogance. Those who remained looked upon it with sorrow and dread, whispering in strange tongues that even they could barely comprehend. Groups began to form, small at first, bound by the threads of shared speech. Fathers called to sons, mothers to daughters, and slowly tribes took shape from the chaos. One group turned north toward the mountains, where the winds were cool and the rivers swift. Another went south, chasing the warmth of the sun. Others followed the courses of great rivers, east and west, seeking lands where their flocks might graze and their seeds might grow. They left behind the plains of Shinar like the retreating tide, each path carved by divine command though none of them yet knew it. And as they went, their tongues grew richer, their words multiplied, and the world began to hum with the music of new languages. Nimrod's kingdom was no more. Some still followed his name, calling him the mighty hunter, the first king, the one who had defied heaven itself. But even his followers soon drifted apart, carried by the winds of confusion. Nimrod himself had vanished into the desert, and stories of him turned into legend. Some said he wandered until his death, others whispered that God had taken him, leaving no trace but his pride. The city of Babel became a ruin, swallowed by sand and silence. Wild vines crept across its broken walls, and birds nested where once men shouted their ambitions to the sky. As generations passed, the tribes spread farther. The sons of Japheth journeyed toward the north and the west, settling by the coasts and building their homes near the sea. The sons of Ham moved southward, to the warm lands of Cush and Egypt, where the rivers overflowed with life. And the sons of Shem, through whom the promise would come, remained nearer to the heart of the world, in the lands that would one day be called Canaan and Mesopotamia. Each carried fragments of the old knowledge, the art of shaping stone, the craft of writing, the memory of one God who ruled above all. Yet their tongues confused the truth, and soon they gave the heavens many names, building idols of their own imagining. In the high mountains, one tribe looked to the storm clouds and called them gods. In the jungles, another carved the sun's face into gold. By the rivers, men worshipped the serpent for its strength, the eagle for its flight, the bull for its might. The knowledge of the Creator dimmed like fading light, yet in every heart there remained a spark, a faint whisper of the one who had made them. The Spirit of God moved over the earth still, unseen, watching, guiding, waiting. Children grew up hearing tales of the great tower, of the time when all men were one, and how the heavens came down to scatter them. Some told it with pride, as proof of human daring. Others told it with fear, as a warning of divine power. But in every version, the truth remained, that the unity of men without the will of God leads only to ruin. And so the earth filled with nations, each with its own tongue, its own laws, its own dreams, yet all of them descendants of the same father, Noah, and all still bearing the same image of the Creator. As time moved forward, the tribes began to forget their kinship. Distance grew into difference, and difference became enmity. Kingdoms rose and fell. Some built cities upon rivers, others wandered as nomads beneath the open sky. Yet even in their divisions, they fulfilled the hidden design, to fill the earth as God had commanded. The Lord had scattered them, but not abandoned them. From their spread came diversity, art, and knowledge. From their confusion came the seeds of future understanding. For though the languages of men were many, the language of truth still whispered in their souls. Generations later, travelers would stand upon the ruins of Babel and wonder who had built them. The stones, half buried in dust, bore markings no one could read. Scholars and kings came to study them, each claiming wisdom, but none understanding that those stones were not merely relics of failure, they were the foundation of God's mercy. For had man succeeded, pride would have devoured the world once more. But through the scattering, the world lived. In the far lands of the east, one tribe discovered writing upon clay. In the west, another learned to forge bronze and shape tools. Across deserts and seas, men carried stories of creation, of the flood, of a God who once walked among them. Though their words differed, their hearts carried the same memory. And from that memory, faith would one day return. The wind still blew across Shinar, whispering through the broken tower. Birds soared where once scaffolds had stood, and grass grew between the stones. Yet even in ruin, the place was not forsaken. For from the ashes of man's pride, God had sown the roots of His greater plan, that one day, through a chosen line, all nations might again speak one language of spirit, united not by arrogance, but by faith. Thus the scattered nations became the tapestry of the world, countless colors woven from one thread. And the Lord looked upon the earth and saw that it was full once more. His judgment had become mercy, His division had become design. Though men no longer shared one voice, their hearts still beat with a longing for the divine. And in that longing lay the beginning of redemption. Centuries passed since the scattering of Babel, and the memory of that great confusion dimmed like smoke fading into the wind. The nations had spread far and wide, building their cities, carving their empires, naming their lands. Yet with every new stone raised and every altar built, the heart of man grew colder toward the one who had made him. The voice that once spoke to Noah, the presence that guided Abraham's forefathers, became a whisper buried beneath the noise of many gods. Men no longer looked toward heaven in reverence but downward, into the works of their own hands. They molded idols of clay and bronze, shaped in the image of beasts and men, and bowed before them, saying, These are our gods who rule the sea and the storm, the harvest and the fire. The true Creator, unseen and eternal, was forgotten among His own creation. In the land of the East, kings rose who claimed to be divine. They built temples that scraped the sky, echoing Babel's ambition, and filled them with statues of their likeness. Priests offered incense and blood, their chants rising like smoke, while the people bowed in fear, not faith. The children of men traded the truth of heaven for the comfort of visible gods. Each nation spoke its own language, sang its own hymns, and worshipped its own inventions. The heavens, once filled with praise, grew silent. Yet the Spirit of God still moved, unseen, through the hearts of a few shepherds in the fields, wanderers beneath the stars, dreamers who felt the emptiness of wooden idols and yearned for something greater. In the valleys of Mesopotamia, a child looked upon the moon and wondered who had placed it there. His father told him of Nana, the moon god, whose chariot rode across the night sky. But the boy, whose heart was restless, whispered, "No, there must be one greater." In the mountains to the west, a woman prayed for her dying son and found no comfort in the stone image before her. In her grief, she lifted her eyes to the sky and cried, "If you exist, hear me." And though no voice answered, the wind stirred softly, carrying her tears toward the heavens. Across the world, countless souls began to feel the same stirring, the faint, holy discontent that precedes revelation. The rulers of men, blind to such whispers, tightened their grip on power. They declared themselves gods, demanding worship, commanding armies, and waging wars in the names of idols. Blood flowed like rivers upon the altars of vanity. In Egypt, the sun was called Ra, and men bowed before its light. In Babylon, Ishtar ruled with beauty and cruelty. In the northern lands, warriors lifted golden hammers to the thunder god. Everywhere, the pattern of Babel repeated: pride, power, and forgetfulness. Yet the Lord, patient and watching, allowed mankind to wander, that in their searching they might one day remember Him. The earth flourished with invention but starved for truth. The stars that once spoke of the Creator's glory were now mapped as thrones of lesser gods. The seasons came and went, harvests rose and fell, and men praised the idols for blessings they could not give. The few who remembered the old stories, of creation, of the flood, of the God who had walked with Noah, were mocked as madmen. Yet the promise still lived, buried deep within the line of Shem. From his descendants would come one who would hear the true voice again, one whose faith would rebuild what pride had broken. As generations passed, the world sank deeper into darkness. Temples rose like mountains, but the spirit of man fell into dust. Children grew learning the names of idols, never the name of the Lord. The heavens seemed distant, and the earth was filled with noise, the chants of false priests, the cries of captives, the clash of armies fighting under banners of false gods. But the eyes of the Lord searched still. Amid the endless lands and countless tongues, He watched for a heart that would seek Him, not for power, not for favor, but for truth. One night, in the city of Ur, where the temples of the moon god gleamed with silver light, a man named Terah tended his household. Among his sons was one called Abram, a quiet man who often walked alone beneath the stars. He listened to the songs of the priests and the prayers of the people, yet something within him remained unsettled. He would gaze upon the heavens and feel a longing he could not name. The moon above, which others worshipped, seemed to him not a god but a creation, a sign of something beyond comprehension. "Who made all this?" he often whispered. And though no one answered, peace filled his heart each time he asked. In the stillness of one such night, as Abram watched the stars shimmer like a sea of fire, a voice broke the silence, not loud, but deeper than thought, clearer than sight. "Abram," it said. The man froze, his heart pounding. He turned, yet saw no one. "Who calls me?" he whispered. The voice came again, like the breath of eternity. "I am the Lord of heaven and earth, the God of your fathers, whom your people have forgotten. Walk before me, and I will show you the truth." Abram fell to his knees, trembling, tears upon his face. "Lord," he said, "the world has many gods, but none speak. If you are real, teach me your ways." The voice answered, "Leave your father's house and your land, and I will lead you to a place I will give you. Through you, all nations of the earth shall be blessed." The stars above seemed to burn brighter, as though they themselves bore witness. Abram lifted his eyes and whispered, "I will go." And from that moment, the silence of the earth was broken. The forgotten God was forgotten no longer. His covenant was about to begin anew, not in temples of stone, but in the faith of a single man who dared to listen. The dawn rose over the city of Ur, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Smoke curled from the high ziggurats where priests offered incense to the gods of stone, and the songs of morning worship echoed through the streets. Yet in one quiet corner of the city, a man stood apart from the noise. Abram, son of Terah, watched the rising sun not as a god to be praised but as a creation of something greater. He had heard the voice once, that night beneath the stars, and its echo still lived in his soul. Every morning since, he felt its pull, a silent urging, a promise waiting beyond the horizon. He no longer bowed before the idols of his father's house, though the fear of discovery pressed on him like a shadow. In his heart, faith had begun to take root, fragile yet alive, and it burned brighter than the fires of the temples. Days turned into weeks, and the voice came again. "Abram," it said, clear as sunlight and soft as wind, "leave your country, your people, and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you." Abram trembled, for he knew this was no dream. He felt the power of it, as if the very air around him bowed in reverence. "But Lord," he whispered, "where shall I go? What shall I take?" The voice answered, "Go in faith. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will curse. And through you, all families of the earth shall be blessed." The promise settled upon Abram's heart like the seal of destiny. He told Sarai, his wife, what he had heard. She listened, her eyes wide with both fear and wonder. "Leave Ur," she said softly. "Leave all that we have known?" Abram nodded. "The Lord has spoken, and I must obey." She looked toward the idols her father had given her on her wedding day, then back to Abram. "If this God you hear is truly above all others," she said, "then I will go where he leads you." Her words filled him with courage. He gathered his household, his herds, and his servants. His nephew Lot joined them, loyal and eager, though he did not yet understand the journey ahead. When Terah, Abram's father, learned of his son's decision, he was angered. "You abandon your ancestors," he said. "You follow a voice no one hears but you." Abram bowed his head. "Father," he said gently, "the gods of this city are silent." but the one who calls me is alive. I cannot stay." Terah, though proud, saw the fire in his son's eyes and said no more. He too left Ur, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of curiosity. Together they traveled northward along the great rivers until they reached Haran, a land rich with pasture. There Terah grew old and died, but Abram's heart remained restless, for the voice still whispered, "Go farther." One morning, as the mist lifted from the hills of Haran, Abram stood upon a ridge and looked toward the unknown south. He felt the weight of his years, yet within him burned the strength of purpose. The voice spoke once more, quiet but unmistakable. "Now, Abram, arise. Go to the land I will give to your descendants." He turned to Sarai, who stood beside him, her face radiant with trust. "It is time," he said. They gathered their tents, their herds, their servants, and set out. Behind them, the city of Haran faded into the distance. Before them stretched the wilderness, vast and uncharted. Each step was an act of faith, each mile a prayer. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. They crossed dry plains and green valleys, following the stars at night and the whisper of the Spirit by day. Abram often paused to build small altars from stones, where he offered simple prayers to the unseen God who guided him. Wherever he stopped, the air seemed different, as if heaven itself watched. The tribes they met asked, "Who is this man who speaks with the wind?" And Abram would answer, "I serve the Lord, maker of heaven and earth." Some mocked him, others listened, but none could deny the peace that followed him. At last, they came to the land of Canaan. The hills rolled gently, and rivers shimmered like silver threads beneath the sun. God spoke again, and Abram fell to his knees. "To your offspring," said the voice, "I will give this land." Abram built an altar there, and for the first time in generations, the name of the true God was spoken aloud in Canaan. The mountains seemed to echo his words. But faith is always tested. Famine struck the land soon after, and Abram's household was forced to journey south into Egypt. Sarai feared the journey, for she knew the beauty that others saw in her, and the danger it could bring. Abram, too, was afraid, yet he trusted that the God who had led him this far would not abandon him. Through trials and deception, the Lord preserved them, proving that his promise was not bound by circumstance. When they finally returned to Canaan, Abram stood once more beneath the stars. The same stars he had seen in Ur, countless, eternal. And the Lord spoke again, "Lift up your eyes to the heavens and count the stars, if you can. So shall your descendants be." Abram's eyes filled with tears. "Lord," he said, "I have no son, and I am old. How shall this be?" And the voice replied, "Believe, and it shall be accounted to you for righteousness." That night, Abram built an altar and prayed until dawn. The flames flickered against the dark, and the wind carried the smoke upward, a bridge between earth and heaven. He no longer doubted. His faith had become the seed of nations, the beginning of a covenant that would one day redeem the world. And the God who had once been forgotten now had a friend upon the earth. Night covered the hills of Canaan like a vast, silent cloak. Abram sat beside the altar he had built, the fire before him burning low, its glow reflected in his weary eyes. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and promise. Though he had traveled far and obeyed every command, his heart still wrestled with doubt. The Lord had promised him descendants as countless as the stars, yet he and Sarai were still without a child. His hair was silver now, his hands lined with age, but his faith still clung to the voice that had called him from Ur. As he lifted his gaze to the heavens, the stars shimmered like living flames, and he whispered, "O Lord, what will you give me, seeing that I go childless?" His voice trembled with longing. "You have given me all the earth, yet no heir to share it." Then, as the fire flickered, a light not of this world descended. It was soft yet powerful, filling the air with warmth and awe. And the Lord spoke to him, saying, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward." Abram bowed low, tears in his eyes. "Lord God," he said, "what can you give me, when I have no son? The servant born in my house will inherit all that I have." The voice answered, "Calm and eternal, this man shall not be your heir, but one who shall come from your own body shall be your heir." The light grew brighter. "Come," said the Lord, "look now toward heaven, and count the stars if you can. So shall your descendants be." Abram's heart swelled with wonder. He looked at the countless lights above and felt faith rise like a flame within him. "I believe you, Lord," he whispered. And it was accounted to him for righteousness. The voice spoke again, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to give you this land to inherit." Abram, trembling yet bold, asked, "Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it?" Then the Lord commanded him to bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a pigeon. Abram did as he was told, dividing the animals in halves and laying the pieces opposite each other. As the sun began to set, he waited, watching the sky deepen from gold to crimson to darkness. Birds of prey descended upon the carcasses, but Abram drove them away, determined to protect the offering. When night fell fully, a deep sleep came upon him, and a dread, holy and heavy, fell over his spirit. Then the Lord spoke again in a voice like thunder and wind. "Know this, Abram, your descendants will be strangers in a land not their own. They will serve there and be afflicted for 400 years, but afterward I will judge that nation and bring them out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age." As the Lord spoke, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch passed between the pieces. The covenant was sealed. The Lord declared, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." The stars seemed to sing in the stillness, and Abram bowed with his face to the ground. Years passed, yet the promise remained unfulfilled. Sarai, still barren, watched time slip away like water through her fingers. One night she turned to Abram, sorrow in her eyes. "The Lord has held me from bearing children," she said softly. "Take my maidservant Hagar, perhaps I shall obtain children through her." Abram hesitated, but her pleading gaze and his own weariness overcame him. Hagar bore him a son, and they named him Ishmael. But the Lord's plan was not through human design, it was through divine faith. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him again. This time, the light was brighter than ever before, and the presence of God surrounded him like fire. "I am Almighty God," said the voice. "Walk before me and be blameless. I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly." Abram fell upon his face, trembling. Then God said, "No longer shall your name be Abram, but Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will bless you greatly, and kings shall come from your line. I will establish my covenant between me and your descendants after you, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to them. The Lord continued, as a sign of this covenant, every male among you shall be circumcised. This shall be a mark between me and you forever. Abraham obeyed, though the command was hard, and thus sealed the everlasting promise with his blood and faith. Then God said, As for Sarai your wife, you shall no longer call her Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. I will bless her and give you a son by her, and she shall become the mother of nations. Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, not in mockery but in wonder. Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? He asked. And shall Sarah, who is 90, bear a child? The Lord replied gently, Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return, and Sarah shall have a son. When the vision ended, Abraham stood alone beneath the stars once more. But this time, the sky looked different, brighter, nearer, as if every light above whispered his name. The covenant had been spoken, sealed, and bound forever between heaven and earth. He was no longer Abram, the wanderer of Ur. He was Abraham, friend of God, bearer of promise, father of nations yet unborn. And though the night around him was vast, his heart burned with faith brighter than any star. The sun rose softly over the hills of Mamre, where Abraham's tent stood like white sails upon the green plains. Years had passed since the covenant was sealed, and though Abraham's hair had turned to silver, his faith remained steadfast. Yet even in his strength, he sometimes looked toward the horizon with quiet longing, for the promise of a son had not yet come to pass. Sarah too had aged, her laughter dimmed by years of waiting. Yet her heart, though wrapped in weariness, still clung to hope, a fragile thread that refused to break. The Lord had spoken, and they both knew his words did not return empty. One morning, as Abraham sat in the heat of the day by the entrance of his tent, 3 men appeared on the road, their forms gleaming in the sunlight as though they carried the brightness of heaven itself. Without hesitation, Abraham rose and bowed low to the ground. "My Lord," he said with humility, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let me bring water to wash your feet and bread to refresh your hearts." The visitors accepted, and Abraham hurried into the tent. "Quick," he said to Sarah, his eyes alight with purpose, "prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it and make cakes." He ran to the herd, chose a tender calf, and gave it to a servant to prepare. The meal was served under the great oak of Mamre, where the shade was cool and the air still. The 3 men ate, and one of them, whose face shone with divine peace, turned to Abraham and said, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham replied, "She is in the tent." Then the man said, "I will surely return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son." From within the tent, Sarah heard these words, and she laughed quietly to herself. "After I have grown old, and my Lord also old, shall I have pleasure?" she thought. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I surely bear a child when I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return, and Sarah shall have a son." Sarah, frightened, came forth and denied it. "I did not laugh," she said. But the Lord replied, "No, but you did laugh." And though her laughter had sprung from disbelief, it would one day return as joy. Months passed. The seasons turned, and the hills around Mamre bloomed with life. Sarah's laughter changed, from doubt to wonder, from wonder to faith. The tent that had once echoed with silence now filled with songs of preparation. Servants whispered of miracles, and Abraham's heart swelled with reverence each time he touched his wife's hand. Then, as the Lord had promised, in the fullness of time, Sarah bore a son. The night was still, the stars bright, and the cry of the child pierced the silence like a trumpet of hope. Abraham fell to his knees, his face in the dust, and wept with joy. He named the child Isaac, meaning laughter, for God had turned their sorrow into gladness. When Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded, sealing him into the covenant of promise. Sarah looked upon her child, her heart overflowing. "God has made me laugh," she said, her eyes shining, "and all who hear will laugh with me." She held Isaac close, and in that embrace the centuries of waiting were fulfilled. Every prayer, every tear, every question had led to this moment, the birth of the child through whom the covenant would live. The camp rejoiced, for they had seen the faith of their master rewarded. As the boy grew, he became the joy of his parents' hearts. Abraham taught him to tend the flocks, to build altars, to pray to the invisible God who ruled the heavens. Often at dusk, they stood together beneath the same stars under which God had spoken his promise. Abraham would point upward and say, "One day, my son, your descendants shall be as countless as these." Isaac would smile, not fully understanding, but the light in his father's eyes told him that the words were true. Yet not all in the camp shared that joy. Hagar, the Egyptian maid, and her son Ishmael watched from afar. Ishmael, now a young man, felt bitterness growing in his heart. Once he had been his father's only son, but now he was the son of the bondwoman, overshadowed by the child of promise. One day, when Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac, her heart flared with anger and fear. She turned to Abraham and said, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this slave shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Abraham's heart was torn, for he loved Ishmael deeply. That night he prayed, and God said to him, "Do not be distressed. In all that Sarah has said, listen to her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called. But also of the son of the bondwoman I will make a nation, for he is your offspring." Early the next morning, with a heavy heart, Abraham gave Hagar bread and water and sent her and Ishmael away into the wilderness. His eyes followed them until they disappeared beyond the hills. In the days that followed, Abraham often gazed into the distance, torn between grief and gratitude. Yet the Lord comforted him, reminding him of the promise that stretched beyond his sorrow. "Through Isaac," said the voice in his heart, "shall the covenant live." Years later, as Isaac played in the fields, Abraham watched him with quiet joy. The laughter of the boy filled the camp like music. The promise had become flesh, the covenant had taken root, and God's faithfulness shone brighter than ever. Abraham no longer questioned the ways of heaven. He had learned that the Lord's timing was perfect, and his word never failed. In Isaac's smile, he saw the reflection of divine mercy, proof that even when faith falters, God's promise endures. And so the old man lifted his eyes to the sky once more, the stars twinkling like the laughter of heaven, and whispered, "You are faithful, O Lord. You have done as you said." The dawn was cool and still when the voice came again, the same voice that had led Abraham from Ur, that had promised him a son, that had made his barren wife a mother. But this time, its words pierced the heart like a blade. "Abraham." He answered quickly, "Here I am, Lord." And the voice said, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering upon a mountain I will show you." The world seemed to stop. The air left his lungs. He looked toward the tent where Isaac slept, the boy's laughter still echoing faintly in his mind. His heart trembled, yet he did not speak against the command. He had walked with God too long to question his will. Slowly, he bowed his head and said, "Here I am." That night, Abraham did not sleep. The stars above, once symbols of promise, now watched in silence as he prepared for the journey. Before dawn, he rose and saddled his donkey. He took 2 servants and his son Isaac. He split wood for the offering, his hands steady though his soul was in turmoil. Each stroke of the blade against the wood felt like a wound to his own heart. At sunrise, they began their journey. For 3 days they traveled through hills and valleys, the path stretching endlessly before them. Isaac, now a strong youth, walked beside his father, his eyes filled with trust. They spoke little. Abraham's thoughts were prayers, prayers without words, only tears. On the 3rd day, the Lord showed him the mountain in the distance. Its peak was sharp and golden in the morning light. Abraham stopped and said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go yonder to worship, and we will return to you." His voice did not waver, though his heart nearly broke on the word "we." He took the wood from the donkey and laid it upon Isaac's back. He himself carried the fire and the knife. Together they began to climb. As they walked, Isaac spoke for the first time. "My father," he said. Abraham turned, his throat tight. "Yes, my son." Isaac looked at the bundle of wood upon his shoulders and the fire in his father's hand. "Behold," he said, "the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham stopped. The world was silent. The wind brushed through the grass, whispering of heaven and earth. Then Abraham said softly, "God will provide himself the lamb for the offering, my son." Isaac nodded, trusting completely. They continued upward, step after heavy step, the boy carrying the wood of his own sacrifice, unaware of its meaning. When they reached the place God had shown him, Abraham built an altar from the stones of the mountain. He arranged the wood upon it carefully, his hands shaking. Then he turned to Isaac, his beloved son. The boy looked at him with calm eyes, though something in his father's face told him what was to come. "Father," he whispered, but Abraham could not answer. Tears blurred his sight. "My son," he said at last, voice breaking, "God has chosen this." And Isaac, full of innocence and trust, did not resist. He let his father bind his hands, though his heart must have trembled. He lay upon the altar, the wood beneath him rough and cold. Abraham lifted the knife. Time stopped. Heaven and earth held their breath. His hand rose high, trembling but resolute. His faith had become an offering greater than the sacrifice itself. At that instant, a voice thundered from the heavens, "Abraham! Abraham!" He cried out, "Here I am." The voice said, "Lay not your hand upon the boy, nor do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." The knife fell from his hand, clattering upon the stones. He fell to his knees, sobbing. Isaac sat up, wide-eyed, and Abraham gathered him in his arms, holding him as though the world itself had been restored. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He rose and took the ram, offering it instead of his son. The flames rose high, and the smoke curled into the sky like a song of deliverance. Abraham named that place Jehovah-Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. As they watched the smoke rise, the voice of God came once more, not in thunder, but in peace. By myself I have sworn, said the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand upon the shore. Your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies, and through your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. The mountain fell silent again, but the air shimmered with holiness. Abraham and Isaac descended together, father and son united by faith and fire. When they returned to the servants, Isaac carried the knife and his father carried the fire, but both now carried something greater, the knowledge that faith is not blind obedience, but perfect trust in the one who gives life. In the years that followed, whenever Abraham looked upon his son, he saw not only love but redemption. Isaac was no longer merely the child of promise, he was the living sign that God's mercy is stronger than any test. And upon that mountain, where faith met obedience, the shadow of a greater sacrifice was cast, one that would come generations later, when another son would carry wood upon his back and walk up another hill to fulfill the ultimate covenant of love. The days after the mountain of Moriah were filled with quiet wonder. Abraham's heart, once heavy with fear, now overflowed with peace. The memory of the knife, the altar, and the voice from heaven burned in his soul not as pain but as glory. Every time he looked at Isaac, walking tall and free among the tents, he remembered that the Lord had truly provided. The boy's laughter was a hymn, and the gentle wind across the hills of Canaan seemed to carry the sound of God's promise through every valley. Word of Abraham's faith spread across the land, and those who heard it spoke in awe, "This is the man who obeyed his God even unto death, and lived." Yet Abraham did not boast. He spoke little of what had happened, for the mountain was a sacred memory, too holy for many words. One evening, as the stars appeared, Abraham knelt beside the altar near his tent. The fire flickered, casting gold light upon his weathered face. "O Lord," he prayed softly, "you have tested me and found me faithful by your grace. You spared my son, and in doing so, you taught me that your mercy is endless. I ask now only this, that you keep your promise alive through him, that his descendants may walk in your ways and not forget you as the world once did." As he prayed, the wind rose gently, and a deep stillness fell upon the camp. The same voice that had called him years ago spoke again, calm and eternal. "Abraham, my servant, because you have obeyed me, I will renew my covenant with you. In your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed. Kings will come from your line, and through your faith, the world will find light again." The next morning, Abraham rose early and called Isaac to him. Together they built another altar and offered a lamb in thanksgiving. The boy asked, "Father, will God always speak to you like this?" Abraham smiled, his eyes filled with wisdom. "He speaks to all who listen, my son. Sometimes through thunder, sometimes through silence, but always with truth." Isaac nodded, and though he did not yet understand the full weight of those words, he felt their power. In time, life in the camp returned to peace. The herds grew, the servants sang, and the blessings of the Lord were visible in every corner. Yet Abraham knew that his days were drawing near their twilight. He spent many evenings teaching Isaac the ways of the covenant, how to build altars, how to pray, how to trust when the path is unclear. "Remember, my son," he would say, "our God is not like the idols of the nations. He lives, he sees, and he keeps his word. You must walk before him with faith, even when he is silent." Isaac listened with a heart both humble and strong, and in him the spirit of his father's faith took root. Years later, after Sarah passed away, Abraham buried her in the cave of Machpelah, a place he bought with silver as a family tomb. There he wept, not with despair but with gratitude, for she had lived to see God's promise fulfilled. He often sat by her resting place, speaking softly to the memory of his beloved. "You laughed once, Sarah," he would say, "and that laughter became the song of our covenant. Your joy was the beginning of nations." The people of Canaan, who had long watched him, called him the friend of God, for they saw in him something no mortal king possessed, peace born of divine trust. As Abraham grew older, the Lord visited him once more. It was a still night, and the air glowed with starlight. "Abraham," the voice said tenderly, "your time draws near, but fear not, for my promise stands. Your son shall inherit my covenant, and through his seed my plan will continue. The nations will know me through the faith that began in your heart." Abraham lifted his eyes to the sky one last time. The stars above seemed closer than ever, as though heaven itself leaned down to honor him. "I am ready, Lord," he whispered. "You have been faithful in all things." Before his final days, Abraham called Isaac to his side. "My son," he said, "the Lord has been my shepherd all my life. He brought me out of Ur, guided me through famine, gave me your mother's laughter, and tested me upon the mountain. Never doubt him. When you walk in his ways, his hand will guide you, even through the darkness." Isaac knelt beside him, tears in his eyes, and said, "I will remember, Father." Abraham laid his hand upon his son's head and blessed him. "The God of heaven will walk with you, and his covenant will never fail." In the days that followed, Abraham's spirit grew quiet and full of light. The camp moved gently around him, servants tending flocks, Isaac leading in his stead. One evening, as the sun set in gold and crimson, Abraham lay down and closed his eyes. The wind stirred softly through the tent, and for a moment the air shimmered as though heaven and earth had touched. His breath slowed, and his face became peaceful. The friend of God rested, his journey complete. Isaac buried him beside Sarah, in the cave of Machpelah. The people mourned, yet they also rejoiced, for they knew that Abraham's life had changed the world. His faith had become a bridge between earth and heaven, a covenant written not on stone but upon the heart of humanity. And though the man was gone, his promise lived, in Isaac, in the generations to come, and in the God who keeps his word forever. The stars shone brightly that night over Canaan, and the voice of the Lord whispered through the stillness, "Through Abraham's faith, the nations shall be blessed." And so the covenant endured, eternal, unbroken, and alive in the hearts of all who would believe. The days after Abraham's passing were filled with both grief and peace. Isaac, now master of his father's tents, walked often through the fields of Mamre where the old man had once prayed. The wind that moved through the trees felt like the whisper of his father's faith, and each star in the night sky seemed to shine a little brighter, as though heaven itself remembered the covenant. Isaac carried the promise now, not as a burden but as a living fire within his heart. Yet though the blessing of God was upon him, the path ahead was not without trial. The Lord's promises are eternal, but they are tested through generations. Isaac took Rebekah as his wife, a woman of beauty and deep spirit. She came from the house of Nahor, Abraham's brother, chosen by God's guidance through the faithful servant who had prayed, "Let the woman who offers water to me and my camels be the one you have appointed." When Isaac first saw her approaching in the twilight, veiled and radiant, he felt as though destiny itself walked toward him. Their union was peaceful, their love genuine, but many years passed and Rebekah bore no children. The tents that once rang with laughter grew quiet again, and Isaac, remembering his father's patience, went to the fields to pray. He knelt in the dust and said, "O Lord, you who opened Sarah's womb, look upon your servant and remember your word." The Lord heard his prayer. In time, Rebekah conceived, but her joy turned quickly to distress. Within her womb, the children struggled together, and she cried out to God, "If this is your blessing, why am I in such pain?" The Lord answered her, saying, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples shall be separated from your body. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." When the time came to give birth, Rebekah bore twin sons. The first came out red and covered with hair like a garment, and they called his name Esau. The second came out holding his brother's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac, though he loved both, found his heart drawn to Esau, the hunter, the man of the field, while Rebekah loved Jacob, quiet and thoughtful, who dwelled among the tents. The boys grew, and their differences grew with them. Esau roamed the wild hills, his bow always in hand, his strength unmatched. He was bold, quick to anger, yet easily satisfied. Jacob stayed close to home, tending the flocks, watching the stars, and learning the ways of faith from his mother. One day, Esau returned from the fields faint with hunger. Jacob was cooking a pot of red stew, and the smell filled the air. Esau said, "Feed me, I pray you, with that red stew, for I am weary." Jacob looked up and said calmly, "Sell me your birthright this day." Esau laughed bitterly. "What is my birthright to me if I die of hunger?" And he swore an oath, selling his birthright for a meal of bread and lentils. He ate, drank, and rose, and the scripture says, "Thus Esau despised his birthright." Years passed, and famine came upon the land, just as it had in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, for to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath I swore to Abraham your father." Isaac obeyed, and the Lord prospered him greatly. His flocks multiplied, his servants increased, and his name became known. Yet the Philistines envied him and stopped up the wells his father had dug. Isaac moved from place to place, digging new wells, and each time the herdsmen quarreled over them. He named one Ezek, meaning contention, another Sitnah, meaning enmity. But when he dug a third well and there was no dispute, he named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." That night, the Lord appeared to him again and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake." Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord. His faith was quiet but strong, not the fire of his father's youth, but a steady flame that endured through peace and hardship alike. As the years turned, Isaac grew old, and his eyes became dim so that he could not see. The time came to bless his sons, and he called for Esau, saying, "My son, take your weapons, go into the field, and hunt for me venison. Make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me, that my soul may bless you before I die." But Rebekah heard these words and remembered God's prophecy, that the elder would serve the younger. While Esau was still in the field, she called Jacob to her and said, "Obey my voice. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 good kids, that I may prepare them for your father." Jacob hesitated. "My brother is hairy, and I am smooth. My father may touch me and curse me instead of blessing me." Rebekah replied, "Let the curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice." Jacob brought the meat, and Rebekah prepared it. She placed Esau's clothes upon Jacob and covered his hands and neck with goatskins. Jacob entered his father's tent. "My father," he said softly. Isaac answered, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob said, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac hesitated. "The voice is Jacob's voice," he said, "but the hands are the hands of Esau." He ate the meal, drank the wine, and finally said, "Come near, my son, and kiss me." Jacob leaned forward, trembling. Isaac smelled the scent of Esau's clothes and blessed him, saying, "God give you of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." When Jacob left, Esau returned. The truth came out, and Esau wept with a voice that shook the tent. "Bless me also, O my father," he cried. But Isaac said, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." Esau's grief turned to rage. "The days of mourning for my father are near," he said, "then I will kill my brother Jacob." Rebekah, hearing this, sent Jacob away to her brother Laban in Haran, saying, "Flee, my son, until your brother's fury turns away." As Jacob departed, Isaac called him and blessed him again. "May God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful, and give you the blessing of Abraham, that you may inherit the land where you are a stranger." Jacob left with nothing but his staff, yet the covenant of heaven rested upon him. And so, the story of Isaac, the quiet heir of the promise, flowed into the story of Jacob, the wanderer who would see visions of angels and wrestle with God. The covenant continued, living not through perfection, but through faith, through the unbroken thread of divine purpose that began with Abraham and would never end. The road from Beersheba to Haran stretched long and empty beneath the desert sky. Jacob walked alone, a fugitive from his brother's wrath, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. The blessing he had stolen burned within him, not as triumph, but as a burden too great to bear. Each step echoed with his mother's voice urging him to flee, and his father's trembling words of farewell. The sun fell low behind him, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the earth. By nightfall, he found himself upon a stony plain, far from the tents of his family, far from everything he had ever known. The stars above glittered cold and countless, and Jacob, weary from his journey, gathered a stone for his pillow and lay down to rest. As he slept, the world around him faded, and a vision opened before his eyes. He saw a ladder stretching from the earth to the heavens, its base resting upon the soil, its summit lost in light. Upon it, angels of God ascended and descended, their faces shining like fire, their garments trailing radiance. The air hummed with a sound like distant thunder and gentle music, and Jacob's spirit trembled in awe. Above the ladder stood the Lord himself, veiled in glory, and his voice filled the night like the breath of creation. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac," he said. "The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. Your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. In you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Jacob listened, unable to move or speak. The light around him burned, yet it did not consume him. The Lord continued, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken." The words sank deep into Jacob's soul, a promise that pierced through his fear and shame. The vision faded slowly, the angels vanished into the heights, and the ladder dissolved into the sky. Jacob awoke, his heart pounding, his body trembling in the cool dawn air. The desert was silent again, but nothing in him was the same. He sat up, gazing at the stone where his head had rested. It was ordinary, rough and gray, yet now it seemed sacred. "Surely the Lord is in this place," he whispered, "and I did not know it." He looked around in awe, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Rising to his feet, he took the stone that had been his pillow, set it upright as a pillar, and poured oil upon it in reverence. He named the place Bethel, meaning house of God. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I go, and give me bread to eat and garments to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set as a pillar, shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you." His words were simple but born of awe, a covenant of a man who had seen heaven's door and could never again live as before. With renewed strength, Jacob lifted his staff and continued toward the land of the east. The days ahead were long, the sun relentless, but his heart burned with purpose. Each step was no longer flight but pilgrimage. He crossed rivers, climbed rocky hills, and passed through valleys of silence, always feeling that invisible presence beside him. The fear that had once driven him now transformed into faith. At night, when he rested beneath the stars, he often looked upward and thought of the ladder, of angels moving between heaven and earth. It filled him with peace to know that even in exile, he was not forgotten. The God of his fathers had found him in his loneliness and marked him for destiny. Though he was a wanderer, he carried within him the promise that would one day shape nations. And so Jacob walked on toward Haran, the land of his mother's kin, carrying with him the memory of a dream that would guide his life. He did not know what trials awaited him, the years of service, the deceptions he would endure, the family he would build, but he knew now that the heavens were not silent, that the same God who had spoken to Abraham and Isaac had spoken to him too. The morning sun rose behind him, spilling light across the stones of Bethel. The pillar he had anointed gleamed faintly in the distance, a silent witness between man and God. Jacob turned once more toward the horizon and walked forward, the wind at his back and faith in his heart. The covenant had passed into new hands, from Abraham to Isaac, and now to Jacob, and through him, the promise of redemption would continue to unfold. For the first time since leaving home, Jacob smiled. "The Lord is with me," he said softly, "and I will not be afraid." And the desert, vast and golden, seemed to echo his words. Jacob's journey stretched long across the plains of the east until the hills of Haran rose before him, shimmering in the afternoon sun. Dust clung to his garments, and his feet were sore, but his spirit was lifted by the memory of the dream at Bethel. He knew the Lord walked with him. As he drew near the fields, he saw a well surrounded by 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. The mouth of the well was covered by a great stone, and Jacob approached the shepherds resting there. "My brothers," he said, "from where are you?" They answered, "We are from Haran." His heart stirred with hope. "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" he asked. "We know him," they said. "Is he well?" Jacob continued. "He is well," they replied, "and behold, Rachel, his daughter, comes with the sheep." Jacob turned, and his eyes fell upon her, a young woman radiant as the morning. She moved with grace, her veil light upon her shoulders, her laughter carried softly by the breeze. The sun seemed to pause in its path as she approached, leading her father's flock. Jacob's heart beat faster. When he saw her come near the well, he stepped forward, his strength renewed by purpose. Without waiting, he rolled the great stone from the mouth of the well, a task that took several men, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob drew near to Rachel, kissed her hand, and wept aloud. "I am Jacob," he said, "the son of Rebekah, your father's sister." Her eyes widened with joy, and she ran to tell her father. When Laban heard the news, he hurried to meet Jacob, embracing him with warmth and words of kinship. "Surely you are my bone and my flesh," he said, and brought him into his home. Jacob stayed with him a month, serving faithfully in the fields and among the flocks. During that time, his heart grew ever fonder of Rachel. Her kindness, her gentleness, and her beauty filled his days with light. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Jacob spoke to Laban and said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban smiled craftily and said, "It is better that I give her to you than to another man. Stay with me." And so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, but they seemed to him only a few days because of the love he had for her. Each sunrise brought him joy, for he would see her at the well, her laughter like a melody, her presence like a blessing upon his labor. The years passed, and at last the time came for the wedding. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her." Laban gathered the men of the place and made a great feast. But when night came, he took his elder daughter Leah, veiled and silent, and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob, weary from wine and darkness, did not see the deception. When morning broke, he beheld Leah beside him, and anger filled his heart. "What is this you have done to me?" he said to Laban. "Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban answered, unashamed, "It is not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and I will give you Rachel also for the service of another 7 years." Jacob's heart ached, but his love for Rachel was stronger than his pride. He agreed, and after 7 days he took Rachel also as wife. Thus Jacob found himself bound to 2 sisters, one he loved, and one he did not choose. Yet even in this, God's plan was unfolding. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, while Rachel remained barren. Leah bore a son and called him Reuben, saying, "The Lord has surely looked upon my affliction, now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore another son, saying, Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has given me this son also, and she called his name Simeon. Again she bore a son and said, Now this time my husband will become attached to me, and she called him Levi. A fourth time she conceived and said, Now I will praise the Lord, and she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. But Rachel's heart grew heavy with envy. She said to Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled. Am I in the place of God, he said, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Rachel then said, Here is my maid Bilhah, go unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may have children by her. Bilhah bore Jacob 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali, and Rachel said, With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. Leah, seeing this, gave her maid Zilpah to Jacob, and she too bore him sons, Gad and Asher. Thus Jacob's household grew, and rivalry filled the tents. In time, Leah bore more children, Issachar and Zebulun, and finally a daughter, Dinah. And then, in God's perfect time, the Lord remembered Rachel. He heard her prayer and opened her womb. She bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. She named him Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. The camp rejoiced, and Jacob lifted his eyes to heaven, for the covenant of fruitfulness had been fulfilled again. Years had passed since Jacob's first arrival, and he now longed to return to his own land. Send me away, he said to Laban, that I may go to my country and my kindred. But Laban, greedy for his blessing, pleaded with him to stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob agreed to tend the flocks, asking only for the speckled and spotted sheep and goats as his payment. God prospered him, and his herds multiplied exceedingly, while Laban's grew weak. And so, after years of toil, Jacob became rich in livestock, servants, and children. Yet in his heart he longed for the land promised to his fathers. The God of Bethel still called him onward. And Rachel, holding little Joseph in her arms, often looked at her husband and said, Will the Lord bring us home? Jacob would smile faintly and answer, Yes, for the Lord who appeared to me in the dream has never failed. Years passed in Haran, and the seasons turned like the hands of time upon Jacob's soul. His herds grew, his children multiplied, and his tents spread wide across the plains, yet his heart remained restless. The voice of the God of Bethel whispered to him in the night, reminding him of the promise, of a land, a covenant, and a destiny not yet fulfilled. One evening, as the stars shone above the flocks, the Lord spoke to Jacob again, Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Jacob rose in silence, his heart beating with both hope and fear. He knew the Lord's call was clear, but he also knew that to return meant facing Esau, the brother he had wronged. Still, obedience burned brighter than fear, and he resolved to go. He called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flocks grazed and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know how I have served your father with all my strength, yet he has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to harm me. When he said, The speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled, and when he said, The striped shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. Now the angel of God said to me in a dream, Arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Rachel and Leah looked at each other and said, "Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Surely all the wealth God has taken from him belongs to us and our children. Do whatever God has said to you." So Jacob rose, set his sons and wives upon camels, and gathered all his possessions. Without a word to Laban, he departed by night, crossing the river and setting his face toward the hills of Gilead. But when Laban heard that Jacob had fled, he pursued him with his kinsmen and overtook him 7 days later. The night before their meeting, God came to Laban in a dream and said, "Take heed that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." When they met, Laban cried out, "Why did you flee secretly and steal away without telling me, and carry off my daughters as captives? Why did you not let me send you away with mirth and song?" Jacob answered firmly, "Because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. As for your idols, with whomsoever you find them, let him not live." Unknown to Jacob, Rachel had stolen her father's household gods and hidden them beneath her camel's saddle. Laban searched the tents, but Rachel, sitting quietly upon the saddle, said, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the custom of women is upon me." So he searched and found nothing. Jacob, angered, turned upon Laban and said, "What is my trespass? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For 20 years I have served you, your ewes and your she-goats did not miscarry, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you, I bore the loss of it myself. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty. But God has seen my affliction and rebuked you last night." Laban, subdued, said, "These daughters are my daughters, these children are my children, and the flocks are mine, yet what can I do this day to these who are of my flesh? Come, let us make a covenant." Jacob agreed, and they set up a heap of stones as a witness between them. Laban called it Jegar-Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galeed, both meaning the heap of witness. Laban said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another." They ate together upon the mountain, and the next morning Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren and departed. Jacob journeyed onward, and as he went, angels of God met him. When he saw them, he said, "This is God's camp," and he called the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps. Yet peace did not rest fully upon him, for ahead lay Esau, and old guilt rose like a shadow in his heart. He sent messengers before him to his brother, saying, "Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, servants, and maidservants, and I send to tell my lord that I may find grace in your sight." The messengers returned saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you with 400 men." Jacob's heart trembled. That night, he divided his people and flocks into 2 camps, saying, "If Esau comes to one camp and strikes it, the other may escape." Then he prayed, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, who said to me, 'Return to your country and I will do you good,' I am not worthy of the least of your mercies, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become 2 bands. Deliver me from the hand of my brother, for I fear him, lest he come and smite the mother with the children. Yet you have said, I will surely do you good and make your seed as the sand of the sea." He spent the night in deep prayer and sent gifts ahead to Esau, goats, rams, camels, cows, and donkeys, each drove led by a servant instructed to say, "They belong to your servant Jacob, it is a present sent to my lord Esau." Jacob remained alone that night by the ford of the Jabbok, and there a mysterious figure appeared, a man cloaked in divine light, who wrestled with him until dawn. But that story, the night of wrestling and the dawn of blessing, would become the turning point of his soul. The night was thick with silence as Jacob stood alone beside the dark waters of the Jabbok. His camp lay behind him, quiet under the stars, while the river murmured softly at his feet. He had sent everything ahead, his wives, his children, his servants, and all that he possessed. Only he remained, caught between fear and faith, between the past and the promise. The memory of Esau's approach with 400 men pressed upon his mind like a weight. He could not turn back, yet he could not move forward without peace. So he prayed, his voice trembling, "O God of my father Abraham, God of Isaac, deliver me this night." But even as he prayed, a presence drew near, silent, yet filled with power. Out of the shadows came a man, radiant and terrible, whose form seemed both human and divine. Without a word, he seized Jacob, and they wrestled together upon the riverbank. Dust rose beneath their feet, the current roared beside them. All through the night they struggled, strength against strength, will against will. Jacob's heart pounded, his muscles burned, yet he refused to yield. He did not understand who this stranger was, but he knew this battle was not of flesh alone. The hours passed, sweat and dust mingled, and the stars turned overhead. Neither prevailed. As the first faint light touched the horizon, the stranger spoke, his voice like thunder and wind. "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob, gasping for breath, clung tighter. "I will not let you go unless you bless me," he cried. The man's eyes shone like fire. "What is your name?" he asked. "Jacob," came the weary answer. "Deceiver, supplanter, that is my name." The man touched his thigh, and instantly pain shot through Jacob's body as his hip was put out of joint. Yet even in agony, he held fast, his spirit stronger than his flesh. The stranger then said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." In that moment, understanding pierced Jacob's heart like light through storm clouds. He realized he had not wrestled with man, but with the very presence of God. Trembling, he whispered, "Tell me, I pray you, your name." But the voice answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And there, in the breaking of dawn, the stranger blessed him. The morning wind carried the sound of wings, and the presence vanished like mist. Jacob fell to the ground, tears streaming down his face. He looked toward the rising sun, its light spilling across the river, and said, "I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." He rose slowly, leaning upon his staff, his leg wounded but his spirit whole. The limp that marked him would remain forever, a sign of the night he met God and prevailed. He called the place Peniel, meaning the face of God. As he crossed the river to rejoin his family, the first rays of sunlight bathed him in gold. His face was weary, but peace shone within it. The man who had left Canaan as a deceiver now returned as Israel, the one who wrestled with God and found grace. When his family saw him approaching, Rachel ran to meet him, Joseph in her arms. "Jacob," she cried, but he shook his head gently. "Not Jacob," he said softly. "Israel." They could see that something within him had changed. His eyes, once restless, now burned with quiet fire. He gathered them close and looked across the plain where Esau would soon appear. "Fear not," he said, though his voice trembled. "The Lord has blessed me, and his promise stands." Soon the dust of 400 riders rose upon the horizon. Jacob arranged his family carefully, the handmaids and their children first, Leah and hers behind, and Rachel with Joseph last. Then he went before them all, limping with each step, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. The tension in the air was like a drawn bow. Esau rode forward swiftly, his face unreadable. But when he reached Jacob, he dismounted, ran to meet him, and embraced him. He fell upon his neck and wept, and Jacob wept too. The years of anger melted like snow in the sun. Esau lifted his brother's face and said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob answered, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." The women and children came near and bowed. Esau looked upon the flocks and herds and said, "What do you mean by all this company I met?" Jacob said, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." Esau smiled and said, "I have enough, my brother, keep what you have." But Jacob insisted, "Please, take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me." He pressed Esau until he accepted. Then Esau said, "Let us journey together." But Jacob, knowing the pace of his flocks and children, said gently, "My Lord knows the children are tender, and if they are driven too hard even one day, they will die. Let my Lord go before his servant, and I will follow slowly." Esau agreed and returned to Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth, where he built shelters for his household. That night, as Jacob sat beneath the stars, he looked at his hands, still marked from the struggle, and whispered, "The Lord has been gracious to me." He thought of the ladder at Bethel, the years in Haran, and the night by the river when heaven itself had bent down to meet him. The covenant was no longer his father's alone, it was his now, sealed in blood, sweat, and blessing. And though his hip ached and his strength had waned, Jacob felt more whole than ever before. For he had learned that God's blessings often come through struggle, and that true strength is born not from pride, but from surrender. As the stars watched in silence, Israel lay down to rest, his heart at peace, the promise of his God shining like a fire that would never fade. The years of peace in Canaan passed quietly for Israel and his sons, yet within the tents of Jacob a new story began to unfold, one that would carry the covenant beyond the hills of promise and into the heart of Egypt. Among his 12 sons, one stood apart, Joseph, the son of Rachel, born in Jacob's old age, beloved above all others. His eyes were bright, his heart pure, and his spirit full of wonder. Israel loved him dearly and made for him a coat of many colors, woven with threads that shimmered like sunlight upon water. When Joseph walked through the camp, the garment caught the eyes of his brothers, and jealousy began to smolder like fire beneath dry straw. They saw their father's love and felt their own hearts grow cold. Joseph, innocent of their envy, dreamed dreams that were more than the wanderings of a young man's mind, they were whispers from heaven. One morning, he came to his brothers with excitement. "Hear, I pray you, the dream I have dreamed," he said. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." The brothers looked at him with hard eyes. "Shall you indeed reign over us?" they said bitterly. "Shall you have dominion over us?" Their hatred deepened, yet Joseph did not understand the shadow his words had cast. Soon after, he dreamed again and came once more to tell them, and to his father also. "Behold, I have dreamed another dream," he said, his voice full of awe. "The sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me." His father rebuked him, saying, "Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to you to the earth?" But he kept the saying in his heart, wondering what it might mean. The brothers, however, could no longer hide their hatred. One day, when they had gone to feed their father's flocks near Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Go now, see whether it is well with your brothers and the flocks, and bring me word again." Joseph set out gladly, wearing his coat of many colors, his heart full of obedience and peace. He traveled far and found them in the valley of Dothan. When they saw him coming from afar, his bright garment shining in the sun, they said to one another, "Behold, this dreamer comes. Come now, let us slay him and cast him into one of the pits, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. Then we shall see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, sought to save him. "Let us not kill him," he said. "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit here in the wilderness and lay no hand upon him," for he planned to rescue Joseph later and bring him back to their father. So when Joseph came near, they stripped him of his coat of many colors and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat bread, they lifted their eyes and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to Egypt. Judah said, "What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." The others agreed. When the merchants passed by, they drew Joseph up out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. The traders bound him and led him away toward Egypt, his eyes wide with tears and disbelief. From the pit, the hills of Canaan faded behind him, and before him stretched the road of destiny. Reuben returned later to the pit and, finding Joseph gone, tore his clothes in anguish. "The child is not," he cried. "Where shall I go?" The brothers then took Joseph's coat, dipped it in the blood of a young goat, and brought it to their father, saying, "This we have found. Know now whether it be your son's coat or not." When Jacob saw it, he cried out in grief, "It is my son's coat. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn in pieces." He rent his garments, put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. His children tried to comfort him, but he refused, saying, "I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." Thus Jacob wept, and the tents of Israel were filled with sorrow. Meanwhile, the caravan moved southward through the deserts, carrying Joseph into a world of strange tongues and golden temples. The boy who had dreamed of stars now walked among strangers, a slave bound by chains but still watched by the unseen hand of God. He was sold in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a man of power and rank. Joseph's heart was broken, yet his spirit did not yield. In the nights of loneliness, he remembered the dreams, the voice of his father, and the God of his fathers. "Though I am far from home," he whispered, "the Lord of Abraham and Isaac is still near." And the Lord was indeed with him. The same hand that had shaped his dreams now guided his steps. Though his brothers had betrayed him, heaven had not. The road that led through the pit and the market was not the end, but the beginning, the beginning of a plan greater than any could see. In the house of Potiphar, Joseph worked diligently. The Lord blessed all that he touched, and his master soon trusted him with everything he owned. The fields, the servants, the house, all prospered for Joseph's sake. Though he was a slave, the favor of God clothed him more richly than the coat he had lost. The dreamer had been cast down, but not destroyed, for his dreams were not his own, they belonged to the purpose of the Almighty. And far away, under the same stars, Jacob still prayed, his heart broken but his faith alive. Though he could not see it, the promise was moving forward, through sorrow, betrayal, and exile, toward redemption. In the land of Egypt, where the sun burned bright upon temples and the Nile flowed like a ribbon of life through the desert, Joseph served in the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Though he was a slave in a foreign land, the Lord was with him, and all that he did prospered. Potiphar soon saw that the hand of God rested upon Joseph, and he found favor in his master's eyes. Potiphar made him overseer of his house and placed all that he had in Joseph's care. From that day, the blessing of the Lord was upon the Egyptian's home, his fields yielded plenty, his servants worked in peace, and his household flourished under Joseph's wise hand. Joseph walked humbly, remembering always the God of his fathers. His chains were gone, but he was still a stranger in a strange land. Yet within him, faith burned brighter than gold. Joseph was strong in body and fair in form, his presence marked by quiet confidence and purity of heart. Potiphar's wife, proud and restless, began to look upon him with desire. Day after day, she sought to draw him into sin, whispering softly, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused. "Behold," he said, "my master trusts me with all that is in his house. There is none greater in this house than I, nor has he kept anything from me but you, his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Her eyes darkened with anger and longing, and though she spoke to him again and again, he would not listen. He turned away from her, keeping his heart pure before the Lord. But one day, when the house was quiet and no servants were within, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." Joseph tore himself away, leaving his cloak in her hands, and fled outside. Enraged and humiliated, she cried out to the men of her household, "See! He is brought in a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice, and when he heard me, he left his garment and fled." When Potiphar came home, she repeated her lie, holding up the cloak as proof. "The Hebrew servant you brought to us came in to insult me. But when I cried out, he fled, leaving his garment beside me." Potiphar's anger burned, and he cast Joseph into the prison where the king's prisoners were confined. The walls were dark, the air heavy, yet even there the Lord was with Joseph. The keeper of the prison soon saw that God favored him, and he gave Joseph charge over all the prisoners. Whatever was done there, Joseph directed it, and the keeper trusted him completely, for the Lord made all he did succeed. Days turned into months, and months into years, yet Joseph did not curse his fate. In the silence of the dungeon, he prayed. "O God of my fathers," he whispered, "though I am forgotten by men, I am not forgotten by you." And the peace of heaven settled over him like light in darkness. One morning, 2 new prisoners were brought into the jail, the chief butler and the chief baker of Pharaoh, who had offended their lord. The captain of the guard placed them under Joseph's care. After some time, both men dreamed dreams in the same night, each with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw their faces troubled. "Why do you look so sad today?" he asked. They said, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams, I pray you." The chief butler spoke first. "In my dream, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It budded, its blossoms shot forth, and clusters of ripe grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and gave the cup into his hand." Joseph listened and said, "This is the interpretation, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you shall again put Pharaoh's cup into his hand as before. But remember me when it is well with you, and show kindness to me, for I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me in this dungeon." When the baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream, and behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's face grew solemn. "This is the interpretation," he said softly. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you upon a tree, and the birds shall eat your flesh from you." And it came to pass on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. He restored the chief butler to his office, and he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had said. Yet the butler did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. 2 full years passed. The walls of the prison aged, and Joseph's hair grew long, but his spirit did not wane. He waited upon God, knowing that the Lord's time was never late. Then one night, Pharaoh himself dreamed a dream that troubled his heart, and none of the magicians or wise men of Egypt could interpret it. And at last, the butler remembered. But that tale, the dream of the king and the rise of the Hebrew slave, would come next, when God's promise began to unfold in full glory. The sun rose over the land of Egypt, gilding the river and the towers of the city with light. In the house of Joseph, plans were already forming, plans not of vengeance, but of revelation. Joseph had seen his brothers bow before him once more, yet his heart yearned to know whether they had changed, whether the cruelty of the past had turned to repentance. He would test them, not for hatred, but for truth. He commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. And put my silver cup, the cup of divination, in the sack of the youngest, and his corn money also." The steward did according to Joseph's word. At dawn, the men were sent away with their donkeys, hearts lightened by hospitality and hope. They did not know that the eyes of Egypt still followed them. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say unto them, Why have you rewarded evil for good? Is not this the cup my Lord drinks from and by which he divines? You have done evil in so doing." The steward pursued them swiftly and overtook them upon the road. The brothers turned, startled, as the soldiers drew near. "Wherefore says my Lord such words?" they cried. "God forbid that thy servants should do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal silver or gold from thy Lord's house? With whomsoever of thy servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my lord's bondmen. The steward answered, Now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. Then every man hastened to open his sack, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. And behold, the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. A silence fell heavy as stone, their faces turned pale, their hearts sank like lead. They rent their garments, loaded their donkeys again, and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, waiting. They fell before him on the ground. Joseph said, What deed is this that you have done? Know you not that such a man as I can certainly divine? Judah said, What shall we say unto my lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. But Joseph said, Far be it from me that I should do so, the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant, but as for you, go up in peace unto your father. Judah stepped forward, trembling, his voice full of sorrow and courage. O my lord, he said, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my lord's ears, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. My lord asked his servants, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And we said unto my lord, We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, the youngest. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him. And thou saidst unto thy servants, Bring him down unto me, that I may set mine eyes upon him. And we said, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave, his father would die. And thou saidst unto thy servants, Except your youngest brother come down with you, you shall see my face no more. Judah's voice shook as he continued, When we went back unto thy servant, our father, we told him the words of my lord. And our father said, Go again, buy us a little food. And we said, We cannot go down, if our youngest brother be with us, then we will go down. And my father said unto us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. And if you take this also from me, and mischief befall him, you shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant, my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass that when he sees the lad is not with us, he will die. And thy servants shall bring down the gray hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame forever. Now therefore, I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad as a bondman to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad be not with me, lest I see the evil that shall come upon my father? The words struck Joseph's heart like thunder in the stillness. He could bear it no longer. He saw before him not the jealous brothers who had thrown him into the pit, but men humbled and changed by sorrow and love. The fire of forgiveness rose within him. He cried, Cause every man to go out from me, and the room emptied until only his brothers remained. Joseph's voice broke as he wept aloud, and his cry was heard throughout Pharaoh's house. Then he said to his brothers, I am Joseph, does my father yet live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. He said again, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Tears filled their eyes as the weight of years fell away. Joseph embraced Benjamin and wept upon his neck, and Benjamin wept upon his. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and after that, his brothers talked with him. The test was complete, forgiveness had triumphed where envy once ruled. News of Joseph's revelation spread swiftly through the palace. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased, for the story of the Hebrew who had risen from slave to savior moved the hearts of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go, get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me. I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land." Wagons were prepared, laden with provisions and gifts. Joseph gave each of his brothers garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. To his father he sent 10 donkeys laden with the best of Egypt, and 10 more carrying corn, bread, and meat for the journey. He embraced his brothers once more and said, "See that you fall not out by the way." Their hearts were full, their eyes bright with tears, for they had left him as a slave but now returned as sons restored. In Canaan, the camp of Jacob lay under the weary sun. The old man sat in his tent, his eyes dim with years and grief. The famine still held the land, and though his sons had returned with food, his soul was heavy with the loss that time had not healed. Then he heard the shout of many voices, his sons calling his name with joy. "Father! Joseph is yet alive. He is governor over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart stood still, for he believed them not. But when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent, the gifts of Pharaoh shining in the light, his spirit revived. "It is enough," he said, trembling. "Joseph my son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die." The journey was long, but hope gave strength to Jacob's years. When he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. That night, God spoke to him in a vision, saying, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here am I." God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of you a great nation. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon your eyes." Jacob rose early and continued the journey. His sons carried him, their wives, and their little ones in the wagons Pharaoh had sent. The flocks and herds followed behind, a moving sea of life heading toward promise. When they entered Egypt, Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. As the chariot drew near, Jacob lifted his eyes and saw Joseph coming. The son he had mourned for 20 years now shone in the glory of Egypt, clothed in power yet humble in heart. Joseph stepped down, ran to his father, and fell on his neck, weeping a long time. Israel wept also, his trembling hands upon Joseph's face. "Now let me die," he said softly, "since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive." The years of sorrow melted away, leaving only the joy of reunion and the peace of fulfilled promise. Joseph brought 5 of his brothers before Pharaoh and presented them. Pharaoh said, "What is your occupation?" They answered, "Thy servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "The land of Egypt is before thee, in the best of the land make thy father and brethren dwell. In the land of Goshen let them live, and if thou knowest any men of activity among them, make them rulers over my cattle. Joseph then brought in Jacob before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. The king of Egypt, robed in splendor, bowed his head before the aged patriarch, whose years and faith commanded reverence greater than crowns. Jacob dwelt in the land of Goshen, and his family grew and prospered. The famine ended, and Egypt's fields bloomed once more. 17 years passed, and Israel's life drew near its close. He called Joseph and said, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put thy hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt, but carry me out and bury me in their burying place. Joseph promised, saying, I will do as thou hast said. Jacob said, Swear unto me, and he swore unto him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head, worshipping the God who had been his shepherd all his days. When the time came that Jacob must die, he blessed his sons, each with a word that reached beyond their lives into generations to come. To Judah he said, The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. To Joseph he gave the blessing of heaven above and the deep that lies beneath, of the breasts and the womb, saying, The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. When he had finished, he drew his feet into the bed and yielded up the spirit. Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded the physicians to embalm his father, and they did so, as was the custom of Egypt. The Egyptians mourned him 70 days, and then Joseph and his brothers carried him to Canaan. Pharaoh sent chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. They buried Jacob in the cave of Machpelah, the field that Abraham had purchased, and there Israel rested with his fathers. When they returned to Egypt, Joseph's brothers feared that now, with their father gone, he would seek vengeance. They sent a message, saying, Forgive, we pray thee, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin. Joseph wept when he heard their words. Fear not, he said, for am I in the place of God? You thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save many people alive. He comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph lived 110 years, and he saw the children of his sons' sons. Before he died, he said, God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. He made the children of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. And when his time came, they embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt, waiting for the day when the promise would lead his people home.